Hey guys, tonight we wander into a peculiar corner of medieval life one you probably wouldn't survive with your reputation intact. Imagine it, a cobbled square, a creaky wooden frame, and a crowd with more time on their hands than is healthy. You're standing in the very stocks that were designed not for thieves, but for women accused of something far more scandalous, talking too much. Yes, in medieval Europe, being branded a gossip was enough to earn you hours, sometimes days, with your ankles and wrists trapped in a wooden frame, the entire village passing by, snickering, and maybe tossing the odd turnip at your feet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love for you to comment where you're listening from, and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the bite of the oak planks as your wrists slide into place, the iron pin dropping with a final clink. The stocks sit at the edge of the square, angled so everyone entering or leaving the marketplace cannot help but see you. For women accused of scolding or whispering, this was the punishment: exposure, discomfort, and ridicule. The villagers passing by are not cruel, not in the sense of whips or chains, but their ladder cuts deeper than any lash. One farmer nudges his neighbor and mutters something about hens cackling louder than the rooster. The punishment was meant to silence. A woman known for gossiping could unravel reputations, challenge a man's honor, or stir trouble in a tightly wound community. In a world where survival hinged on cooperation, idle chatter was seen as dangerous as theft. Historians still argue whether these punishments were more about protecting harmony or simply about silencing female voices that grew inconvenient. You might chuckle at that. Imagine calling out corruption in the market, and being branded a gossip for it. Sometimes, the line was blurry. The sun beats down, and the wooden frame grows warm against your cheek. Hours stretch long when you cannot move. Children stop to gawk, imitating your supposed scolding voice in sing-song mockery. A baker leaves a crust of bread nearby, not from kindness, but so the pigeons flutter around your head, pecking and cooing in noisy mockery. It was humiliation dressed up as community order. And there is a strange, almost carnival-like atmosphere. Picture a woman in the stocks at the midsummer fair, music playing, jugglers tossing pins, and in the center of it all, a wary woman shifting in her bonds, her crime nothing more than words spoken too freely. This bizarre mixture of festivity and punishment blurred into entertainment. Some chronicles even mention wagers being made on how long the accused would hold her composure before breaking into tears. But stocks were not always permanent fixtures. In some villages, they were wheeled out only for occasions. Imagine them being dragged into the square with squealing wooden wheels, assembled piece by piece, and waiting like a stage for its next unwilling performer. The thought of being locked in them created just as much fear as the act itself. Public shame was often worse than physical pain. There are whispers of stranger punishments paired with the stocks. In some places, a woman was forced to hold a sign describing her offensive chatter, false witness, or the dreaded scold. It was a medieval version of walking with a placard, only here, the entire community already knew your business. You could not hide. Tomorrow, at market, everyone would remember. And yet, not all was cruelty. Oddly, some records show neighbors slipping sympathy notes, or a small flask of ale to ease the hours. It's a strange human contradiction. You were mocked loudly, then pitied quietly. Perhaps someone even brushed your hair from your face, though that same hand might laugh at you the next morning. The wind shifts, carrying the smell of roasted meat from a tavern across the way. You can't help but imagine the irony, the gossip punished for talking too much, while the men inside the tavern boast and argue as loudly as they wish. But that was the world you were expected to whisper, not shout, and when your voice carried too far, the stocks were waiting. Some women found ways to endure. They sang softly, hymns or folk tunes, keeping their mind busy while the crowd jeered. Others fell silent altogether, staring at the sky as though already elsewhere, already imagining the release when the wooden frame finally lifted. If you picture yourself there, you might wonder, would you hum bravely, or would you fall quiet under the gaze of the village? The stocks eventually grew outdated. By the late Middle Ages, they were less common, replaced by more elaborate devices like the scold's bridle or ducking stool. But for a long while, this simple frame of wood carried enormous weight. It told women to guard their words, to think twice before letting a secret slip, to remain small in a world that did not reward a voice too loud. And yet, looking back now, there's a faint comedy in it. Imagine being punished for talking, when today entire careers are built on it: YouTube hosts, podcast voices, television chatter. Perhaps the stocks would have been full every day in our own times. Still, as you imagine loosening your stiff wrists and shuffling home at dusk, you feel the odd sting of the lesson. The punishment was never just about you, it was about what others saw, how they would think twice before speaking too freely. And that, more than the wooden planks, left the deepest mark. The stocks creak shut in your memory, but the next device is colder, crueler, and far more peculiar. It is the scold's bridle, sometimes called the brang. Imagine a cage of iron, shaped to cover your head and muzzle your mouth, with a long, thin plate that pressed against your tongue. You feel its weight even before it touches you. The cold iron lowers like a parody of a crown. Only here there is no glory, only silence. The bridle was devised to control what people called scolding women, wives who quarreled, wives who spoke sharply, or simply women with opinions that irritated their neighbors. It looked like a nightmare drawn in blacksmith's ink, iron straps curving around your cheeks, a bar across your brow, and a dangling padlock at the back. Sometimes the tongue plate had jagged edges, just sharp enough to prick if you tried to speak. The message was simple, no more words. You shuffle through a town square with the brank on, the iron rattling at each step, the stares of your neighbors piercing you more than the metal itself. A bell sometimes dangled from the top of the mask, so that every motion rang out, announcing your shame. The punishment turned your very presence into noise, like a sheep with a bell, only here the sound meant disgrace. Historians still argue whether these devices were widely used or mostly symbolic. Some suggest the brank was rare, more a tale retold to frighten women into obedience. Others say it was common enough in northern England and Scotland to leave scars not just on tums, but on memory. The truth may be somewhere in between. Imagine the weight of it after hours. Your neck itches from the iron pressing down. Your breath fogs the cold bars before your lips. Your tongue itches from the metal resting there, a constant reminder of your silenced voice. If you shift, the mask rattles, drawing yet more stares, as though you were a walking performance of what it means to step out of line. And yet, in some dark way, the brank was the trickle. Picture a bustling street, vendors shouting, children weaving between stalls, horses clattering on cobblestones. And in the midst of it, a woman wearing a mask of iron, her eyes glaring from within, the sound of a bell tinkling at each step. The punishment was less about physical harm than about creating a spectacle. There is even a story from 17th century Lanark, where a woman punished with the brank turned the moment into defiance. Instead of slinking through the streets, she strutted, bells ringing proudly, eyes flashing with fire, forcing her neighbors to look away in embarrassment. You almost want to cheer for her, though the records don't tell us how she fared once the mask came off. The brank was also sometimes reserved for those accused of spreading lies or false prophecies. In an age where superstition ran deep, a woman who spoke of dreams or omens could quickly be branded a danger. Better to muzzle her than risk unrest. And yet you smile at the irony. The iron cage itself became a kind of omen, a warning visible to all who saw it. When you imagine wearing such a contraption, your first instinct is to laugh at its absurdity. It looks more like a prop from a pageant gone wrong than a serious tool of justice. But laughter dies when you think of the hours endured beneath it, the heat of summer or the frost of winter pressing against your skin, the endless sensation of being an object rather than a person. It is said that in some towns, women were paraded with the brank while being led on a chain, like livestock. The punishment blurred into humiliation theater, a reminder that silence could be force. Villagers might sing mocking rhymes, or call out jokes, or even toss scraps of food not out of kindness, but to see how the iron cage rattled when she bent down to retrieve them. And you think back to the gossip punished in the stocks. That was bad enough, your wrists trapped in wood, your voice at least your own. But here, with the brank, even your words were stolen. There is a cruel poetry to it, punished for talking, and then punished for not being able to stop yourself from talking. Some versions of the brank included grotesque decoration faces shaped like devils, or long metal noses, so the punished woman became part mask, part monster. Neighbors whispered that such masks made the punishment more effective. In truth, they made the punishment more theatrical. They turned the woman into a moving cautionary tale. By the 18th century, the brank faded from common use. Enlightenment thinkers began to frown at the device, calling it barbaric. Yet stories lingered, and drawings were passed down, so that even when the iron itself gathered rust, the memory of its rattle haunted women's imaginations. As the day fades in your mind's eye, you picture the brank being unlocked. The iron slips away, leaving red marks on your skin, the faint taste of rust on your tongue. You breathe deeply, your voice returning, though perhaps softer now. And you realize the punishment was not just about that single day, it was about the fear that remained afterward. Would you speak so freely again? Would you dare? The iron brank falls away, but silence is never permanent. Soon enough, you find yourself at the edge of a riverbank, staring at a strange wooden contraption. It looks like an ungainly chair bolted to the end of a long beam. This, you realize, is the infamous ducking stool designed not for comfort, but for humiliation. You're seated, your wrists tied, your skirts gathered awkwardly. Villagers surround you, the air filled with chatter, half festive, half menacing. The chair swings outward on its beam, creaking over the water. For a brief, suspended moment you see your reflection ripple below, and then splash. Cold river water swallows you whole, and the crowd roars. The ducking stool was punishment for gossip, for scolding, for so-called disorderly wives. Sometimes it was used for suspected witches, though more often it was aimed at women whose tongues were thought too sharp. Historians still argue whether it was more spectacle than a serious punishment after all. A few dunks left a person shivering but alive. Yet stories whisper that not every woman resurfaced, that the crowd's laughter sometimes hit a darker silence. You feel the water surge into your ears, your lungs clench with the shock. Cold mud brushes your ankles as the stool is yanked up again, dripping. Before you can even draw a full breath, the chair tips again, sending you down once more. The cycle repeats: slaughter, splash, sputter, repeat. And each time, the villagers cheer as if it were a play. The punishment was as much performance as it was penalty. Men jostled for the best view, children pointed, musicians sometimes played. You almost laugh yourself at the absurdity. It was a water ride no one wanted a ticket for. But the lesson was harsh. The woman who spoke too freely would be silenced with river water in her mouth. There is an almost carnival absurdity in how the ducking stool was paraded. Some were mounted on wheels, pushed through the town like floats, with the accused woman already bound in place, rattling along cobblestones toward the nearest pond. Imagine the jeers, the pots and pans clanging, the songs. Invented on the spot. It was humiliation in motion. Oddly enough, some women endured it with defiance. One tale speaks of a woman who, after several dunks, shouted from the dripping chair, "Now I am cleaner than any of you," just so sharp the crowd laughed despite themselves. That sort of humor might have saved her reputation, though it surely did not dry her skirts. The ducking stool also carried layers of symbolism. Water was thought to cleanse, to purify. By dunking a gossip, the community pretended to wash away her offense. But it was also a kind of trial by endurance. If she came out meek, lesson learned. If she came out bold, perhaps she'd be paraded again another day. And of course, there is that darker cousin of the ducking stool, the witch ordeal. In some places, women accused of witchcraft were thrown into water altogether, their survival itself used as proof of guilt. The ducking stool, by comparison, seems almost tame. But the echo is unmistakable: water, women, and judgment all tangled together. The stool itself varied in design. Some were plain planks nailed together, others were more elaborate, with iron hinges, painted beams, even decorative carvings. It was, bizarrely, a crafted object, as if the punishment needed an artisan's touch. Imagine the blacksmith's pride in forging the joints of a chair no one ever wanted to sit in. The punishment was usually short, an hour, maybe two. But the shame lingered for years. The moment of being seen dripping, gasping, clothes plastered to your skin, was remembered and retold. Neighbors joked about it at markets, husbands threatened it in arguments. It was never just one afternoon, it was a lifetime of whispers afterward. Yet as cruel as it sounds, you notice a strange detail. Sometimes women were ducked not because they were hated, but because they were feared. Their words carried weight. Their voices unsettled the balance of things. The ducking stool was the community's desperate, clumsy way of drowning. Influence without bloodshed. You rise in your mind's eye from the river, the water streaming off you like silver threads in the sun. The stool creaks back toward the bank, your teeth chattering, your dignity so. The crowd begins to thin. Someone claps you on the shoulder as if to say, "Lesson learned." But as you trudge home, skirts heavy with river water, you wonder if you will ever open your mouth again, or if, perhaps, you'll whisper twice as sharply in defiance. The river chill fades, but before you can dry your skirts, the ducking stool's cousin arrives with even more pageantry. This is the cucking stool feast, where punishment is not a quick dunk but a drawn-out parade, full of noise, spectacle, and humiliation wrapped in merriment. You imagine yourself seated not on a flimsy plank this time, but on a sturdier chair fixed atop a cart. The villagers haul you through the cobbled streets, the wheels jostling, chickens scattering before the procession. Laughter rises around you. Musicians bang pots, children skip alongside, and neighbors lean from their doorways to watch the absurdity unfold. It is not simply punishment, it is entertainment, the medieval version of dinner, theater with you as the main course. The cucking stool was often used for the same crime as the ducking stool: gossiping, nagging, or what the records call scolding. But unlike the river dunk, this punishment was drawn out over hours, even a full day. You were paraded before your community, then finally brought to a pond or trough for a splashy conclusion. If the ducking stool was a punishment, the cucking stool was a pageant. Historians still argue whether cucking and ducking were truly different devices, or whether the terms simply shifted across regions. Some say cucking was just the parade, ducking the watery finish. Others insist they were entirely separate inventions. Either way, the effect was the same: humiliation through spectacle. The chair itself became a kind of stage. In some accounts, women were forced to wear symbolic costumes as they rode a donkey, ears for foolishness, or horns for infidelity. Imagine the laughter as villagers pointed, nudged each other, and sang little rhymes to mark the moment. It sounds ridiculous now, but in its time, this was considered order, justice, and perhaps even a bit of fun. You hear the creak of the cart as it stops in front of the market cross. Hear the performance pauses, giving everyone a chance to throw remarks your way. Some shout mock sermons, pretending to preach about the dangers of women who talk too much. Others mimic your voice, turning your words into a comic echo. It is cruel, but also strangely theatrical, a medieval comedy show with one unwilling actor. There are stories of crowds adding their own flourishes. In one town, villagers stuffed a woman's lap with cabbages, forcing her to carry them as she jolted along the cart. In another, a rooster was tied beside her, flapping wildly and scratching, a mock companion for a cackling wife. The creativity was boundless, and rarely kind. Yet not all reactions were laughter. Some neighbors felt sympathy, slipping a quiet blessing as you passed. One might whisper, "Keep your chin up," even while laughing aloud moments later to hide their kindness. That strange duality, mockery and pity in the same breath, defined these punishments. They were as much about the crowd's conscience as about the woman herself. The journey ends at water's edge. The chair rattles as you are hoisted above the pond, the crowd humming with anticipation. You know what comes next: the splash, the gasp, the sputtering rise. But this time, the dunk is less the punishment, and more the final, like the last firework of a fair. The real ordeal was the long parade, the hours of stairs, the constant reminder that you were on display. The cucking stool also reveals something subtle about medieval life. Justice was public, and community was everything. There were no quiet fines, no paperwork behind closed doors. Discipline was lived in the open, with the village itself as judge and audience. In some ways, the punishment was as much for the crowd as for you. Watching reminded them of their own boundaries, their own silence, their own fragile place in the social order. And so, as the water closes over your head for the final dunk, you realize that this strange feast was never truly about you at all. It was about everyone else, about their lather, their sense of unity, their relief that tonight, at least, it was not them in the chair. You climb dripping from the stool in your mind's eye, the parade dispersing into the evening. The cart creaks back toward the square, ready for its next performance, its next actor. And you are left wondering whether this bizarre mixture of cruelty and festivity taught obedience, or simply taught women to bear their burdens with quiet endurance. The memory of water fades, but humiliation in medieval life took many shapes, and some of them were quieter, sharper, and far more personal. One of the simplest yet cruelest punishments for women was the shaving of hair. You feel the scissors first, the cold iron brushing your ear as a hand pulls your hair taut. A crowd gathers, murmuring, and then snip. Long strands fall like autumn leaves to the ground, drifting across the stones. In an age when a woman's hair was often her pride, her veil, her dignity, the removal of it cut deeper than the blades themselves. Hair carried meaning. Loose hair marked you as wild, unchaste, or unmarried. Covered hair showed modesty and respectability. Braided hair could signal wealth, or at least patience and care. To strip it away was to strip away identity. The punishment was given for many offenses: adultery, theft, or even stepping outside one's prescribed place. A husband might accuse his wife, or neighbors might whisper enough for the court to act. And when judgment came, the scissors were swift. Historians still argue whether shaving was an official sentence in most places or more a custom enforced by communities. Some court rolls mention it directly, while other records suggest it was done more informally, a kind of mob justice. The truth is tangled, just like the hair that fell in shame. Imagine the scene: the marketplace, with merchants shouting, goats bleating, and in the center, a woman seated on a stool, her head tilted forward while a bailiff or priest cut away. Each lock dropped to the ground was a little gasp from the crowd. By the time the last strand fell, the woman's head shone pale and vulnerable, her humiliation exposed to the open air. Some accounts describe women being marched through streets afterward, their bare scalps rubbed with ashes or mud to heighten the disgrace. Others were forced to wear garlands of straw, mock crowns of shame, making their baldness even more noticeable. It sounds absurd now, but to the medieval mind, it was devastating. Hair, after all, was not just beauty but protection. A bare scalp was cold in winter, sunburned in summer, and a constant reminder of punishment. Worse, it marked you long after the day ended. Unlike a ducking or brank, the effects lingered for months, until the hair grew back. Every time you stepped outside, neighbors remembered. And yet, you wonder whether some women carried it with defiance. Imagine a widow, her hair shorn after being accused of infidelity, striding boldly to church with her head uncovered, daring anyone to stare too long. Perhaps a few even found freedom in the shedding of expectations along with their locks. There is a curious echo here with religious practice. Many nuns shaved their heads upon entering convents, symbolizing humility and devotion. For them, baldness was sacred, chosen. But for women punished, it was humiliation imposed, sacredness twisted into shame. The same act shaving could be holy or cruel, depending only on whether it was chosen or forced. A quirky tidbit survives from medieval France. In some villages, adulterous women had their hair shaved not just once but in public squares 3 times, as if repetition sealed the lesson. It was a ritual of disgrace, like a play performed in acts. You almost want to roll your eyes, was once not enough. Picture yourself leaving the square afterward, scalp raw, air brushing your skin in a way you have never felt before. People whisper as you pass, some in pity, others in scorn. Children jiggle, tugging their mother's sleeves. You tug a hood low over your face, but the shame seeps through the cloth. And yet, beneath the humiliation, there lies something strangely human. Hair grows back. Slowly, stubbornly, it returns. And with each inch, perhaps the sting of the punishment lessens. Months later, you run your fingers through the new softness, remembering the day but also realizing that what was taken is not gone forever. So the punishment of shaved hair, bizarre in its simplicity, carried a long shadow. It taught women that dignity could be stripped away in an instant, that beauty was fragile, that honor rested as much on appearance as on action. And it lingers in your imagination as one of the strangest forms of cruelty, quiet, sharp, and lasting. The locks of hair are gone, but medieval punishment never ran out of inventions. Now, instead of standing still to endure humiliation, you find yourself walking a long, wary walk, barefoot and exposed. This is the punishment of the forced pilgrimage, a strange blend of penance and punishment, where women were ordered to journey to distant shrines or holy sites, not as a choice of devotion, but as a sentence. You feel the first sting as your bare feet meet the rough stones of the road. The morning is cool, but the ground is already sharp, pebbles pressing into your skin. Around you, villagers murmur, watching as you set out. You are not dressed for travel, no sturdy boots, no warm cloak, just your everyday gown, thin against the wind. The journey is the punishment. At first, the idea seems almost merciful. Better to walk than to be dunked, shaved, or bound. But after hours on the road, the cruelty reveals itself. Each step blisters your feet, dust stings your throat, and hunger gnaws as you are given little more than a crust of bread for the journey. Some women were told to walk dozens of miles, others were sent across whole regions. Imagine being ordered to walk from your village to Canterbury, or Santiago, or Rome itself, with no coin in your purse and no certainty of return. Historians still argue whether these punishments truly aimed at spiritual healing or whether they were simply another way to remove troublesome women from the community. Was it penance, or exile in disguise? Some records suggest a woman might never come back, her absence solving the problem more effectively than her silence ever could. Yet pilgrimages themselves held power in the medieval imagination. Roads leading to shrines were dotted with crosses, chapels, and inns, and travelers often sang or prayed as they walked. For a woman forced to go, the line between devotion and punishment blurred. Each shrine passed was both a comfort and a reminder that she was there not by choice but by command. Imagine her reaching a churchyard, her feet bleeding, her face dusty. Perhaps she is told to kneel at the steps, confess aloud, and then continue further still. The villagers might gossip about her absences and pitying, others relieve. In her stead, they tell stories, she is away on holy punishment. The phrase itself sounds almost comical, like a paradox dressed in piety. There are accounts of women carrying heavy crosses or stones along the way, symbols of their guilt. In one German town, a woman accused of lying was ordered to carry a wooden crucifix taller than herself to a distant chapel. You can picture her swaying under its weight, every step a struggle, the locals peering out from their windows as she trudged past. The forced pilgrimage had another odd side effect. It made the punishment visible not only to one village but to every village along the road. Strangers watched, whispered, and judged. Unlike the stocks, where shame stayed in one square, this punishment turned you into a traveling symbol of disgrace. And yet, some women may have found unexpected freedom in it. Away from their homes, walking under open skies, they glimpsed places they might never otherwise see. The road, though cruel, offered a horizon. One can imagine a punished woman pausing at sunset, the fields glowing gold, a soft breeze on her face, and thinking, just for a moment, that the punishment felt like escape. A quirky tale tells of a woman in France who, ordered on a barefoot pilgrimage, slipped into a group of true pilgrims. By the time she reached the shrine, her disgrace had become devotion, and she returned home with stories of miracles rather than shame. Perhaps the punishment did not always work as intended. By nightfall, though, the truth of it settles in. You picture lying on the cold earth, your feet blistered, your body itching. Stars blink overhead, and the silence of the fields wraps around you. Tomorrow, there will be more miles. The shrine waits, but so does the endless road. And so, the forced pilgrimage was both cruel and curious, a punishment that pretended to cleanse, but often simply exhausted. A journey meant to humble, yet sometimes, paradoxically, it opened horizons wider than the walls of a village ever could. The long road fades into memory, but the next punishment waits closer to home, in the very heart of the village. You picture yourself in the square once more, only this time no iron mask or wooden chair awaits. Instead, a heavy stone is pressed into your arms, its weight rough and unyielding. This is the strange ordeal of carrying stones, a punishment as symbolic as it was exhausting. The stone is large enough to itch against your chest, yet small enough to demand that you keep walking. Around you, neighbors gather, their eyes fixed on the slow, stumbling progress. You walk barefoot across uneven cobbles, each step jarring the weight in your arms. The punishment was simple: carry the stone through the streets until you completed a set distance, often from one end of town to the church or market cross. At first, it seems almost comical. Carry a rock. Surely this is less cruel than water dunkings or shaved heads. But within moments, your arms burn, your back stiffens, and sweat trickles down your temple. The laughter of the crowd only deepens the sting. You are not simply tired, you are ridiculous. And that was the point. The offense varied. Some women carried stones for theft, others for quarrels, others simply for defiance. A husband might insist his wife had dishonored him, and the court could respond with the stone walk. Historians still argue whether this was meant primarily as physical penance like a miniature pilgrimage or as spectacle for the townsfolk. Either way, the stone was more than weight, it was shame carved in granite. In some towns, women were ordered to carry multiple stones at once, tied into baskets or sacks slung over their shoulders. Others balanced smaller stones on their heads, wobbling precariously as they shuffled along. There's a record from Nuremberg of a woman required to carry a basket of rocks 3 times around the city wall, a task that took her an entire day. You almost want to sigh on her behalf. Surely her arms remembered that punishment long after her neighbors forgot it. Sometimes, the stones bore symbols. A thief might carry a stone etched with a cross, a liar one with a painted thumb, an adulteress one scratched with horns. These markings turned the punishment into a walking billboard, declaring the crime with every step. Imagine the humiliation, not only heavy in body, but heavy in meaning. And yet, some women may have turned the ordeal into quiet endurance. Picture yourself adjusting your grip, setting your jaw, and walking with slow dignity, refusing to stumble even as your arms scream. In a strange way, the punishment could be claimed as defiance. If you carried the stone well, you carried your shame on your own terms. A quirky anecdote survives from a small Italian village, where women sentenced to carry stones sometimes swap them for lighter ones in alleyways, bribing children with bread to bring pebbles instead of boulders. When caught, they were made to start again, to the villagers' great amusement. You can almost chuckle. Trust human nature to find loopholes, even in misery. But the punishment had a darker side. Stones were not just symbols of burden, they were reminders of public judgment. Villagers hurled jokes, sometimes even small pebbles, mocking the woman already bowed under her load. The walk became a theater of endurance, where every stumble was met with laughter, every grimace with scorn. By the time you reach the church door, your arms are numb, your breath ragged. You drop the stone with a dull thud, its echo bouncing off the stone walls. The crowd disperses, their amusement spent, leaving you sore and weary. And yet, a strange relief washes over you. The weight is gone, if only for now. You think back to the Pilgrim's Road, where the weight was distance, here, it was stone. Both punishments tried to teach humility through burden. Both tried to turn the body into a message. And both left you wondering whether the lesson was obedience or simply that medieval justice was very good at making everyday life feel unbearably heavy. The weight of the stone slips from your arms, but your punishment is not yet over. This time you do not move through the streets, you remain still, bound against the very heart of the village. A rope tightens around your wrists, securing you to the church door. The oak boards are cool against your back, carved with centuries of scratches and prayers. And above you, the bells begin to ring, calling the faithful to Sunday Mass. This punishment being tied to the church door was a ritual of shame as much as penance. It was not hidden away in dungeons or courtyards. It was right here, at the threshold of the sacred. As villagers filed into worship, they could not help but see you, bound and exposed, the reason for your disgrace written across your face. Imagine the feeling. The air smells faintly of incense drifting through the door cracks, mingled with the yeasty warmth of freshly baked bread from nearby homes. You can hear the rustle of skirts, the low hum of hymns beginning inside. Yet you are locked outside, on display for all. Children stare wide-eyed, tugging at their mother's sleeves. Old men mutter prayers as they pass, some spitting to the side in judgment, others shaking their heads in pity. The offenses for this punishment varied. A woman might be accused of breaking Sabbath rules, of quarreling too loudly, or of petty theft. In some towns, adulteresses were bound here, their shame displayed before the community's holiest place. Historians still argue whether the practice was truly widespread or simply recorded in moral tales to frighten women into obedience. Perhaps it was both, fact mingling with folklore, punishment blending with cautionary fable. There is something especially theatrical about the church door binding. It turned the sacred threshold into a stage. Worshippers stepping inside carried the image of your shame into their prayers. Your punishment was not just public, it was woven into the very rhythm of community worship. Sometimes, signs were hung around the woman's neck. A placard scrawled with liar, thief, or scold swung heavily against her chest. Other times, small bundles of straw or nettles were tied to her clothing, symbols of shame or pain. You picture yourself shifting uncomfortably as nettles sting your wrists, all while the congregation files past. And yet, there were softer moments. In one account from a village in Bavaria, a bound woman received a whispered blessing from a passing nun, who slipped her a small sprig of lavender as a token of mercy. Such quiet acts of kindness must have burned brighter for their rarity, tiny candles of compassion flickering in a scene of humiliation. Humor, too, sometimes seeped into the ordeal. Imagine a village jester pausing to bow before you, declaring you the guardian of the church door, and the crowd chuckling at the jest. Even in cruelty, laughter found its way in, though it never softened the ropes around your wrists. Hours stretched long against the wooden planks. The sun warmed your face, then slid behind clouds, leaving you chilled. The smell of smoke from a nearby hearth drifted past, reminding you of soup simmering comfort you could not reach. When Mass ended, the villagers spilled back out, their eyes once again glancing toward you before dispersing into their daily routines. Finally, when the rope was untied, your wrists were stiff and red, your dignity scraped. Wall. You stepped away from the church, knowing that tomorrow neighbors would still remember seeing you there, bound to the very place meant for redemption. This punishment was less about pain, and more about placement. To be fixed to the church door was to be set at the edge of sacred and profane, belonging neither inside nor outside. It told the community, here is what happens when boundaries are crossed. And it left you, quite literally, tied to your shame. The ropes at the church door fall away, but medieval imagination was never short of devices to turn punishment into theater. This time, instead of being bound or shoved, you are dressed up, forced into one of the era's strangest inventions, shame masks and costumes. Picture yourself standing in the square, a heavy mask lowered over your head. It is made of iron or wood, painted garishly, shaped into a caricature of your supposed sin. If you were accused of gossip, the mask might have a tongue sticking grotesquely far out, red and swollen. If you were thought foolish, donkey ears sprouted from the sides. If accused of vanity, a long nose jutted forward like a bee. Suddenly you are no longer yourself, you are a walking cartoon, a living jest. The masks were often grotesque, designed to amuse the crowd as much as to shame the wearer. Some even had bells attached, so that every step jingled, reminding everyone of your disgrace. The sound turned you into a spectacle that could not slip by unnoticed. Historians still argue whether these costumes were common tools of justice or rare novelties in larger towns, but even if they were rare, the memory of them loomed large in imagination. Imagine shuffling forward in such a mask, vision narrowed, the iron scraping your skin. Your breath fogs against the metal, and your shoulders itch under the weight. Children chase after you, laughing at the silly face. Adults chuckle as they pass, whispering jokes. A punishment has become a performance, your humiliation crafted into public entertainment. Sometimes the costumes went further. Women accused of infidelity were made to wear horns, symbolizing cuckoldry, while others were dressed in tattered rags stuffed with straw, making them look like scarecrows paraded through the streets. One odd record from southern Germany tells of a woman forced to wear a chicken costume, complete with feathers glued to her gown, to mock her cackling. You almost smile at the absurdity. Imagine the poor soul sneezing her way through feathers while neighbors clapped in delight. Yet behind the comedy lay cruelty. The masks were heavy, the eye slits narrow, and the ridicule relentless. What seemed funny to the crowd was suffocating to the wearer. Hours inside a donkey-eared mask left the skin raw, the mind weary, and the dignity in tatters. And still, some women found ways to twist the punishment back. Imagine a woman accused of gossip, forced into a long-tongued mask, who begins whiting her head wildly, making the tongue flap ridiculously until the crowd laughs not at her but with her. In that moment, she has seized the jest and made it her own, turning humiliation into a strange kind of triumph. These punishments also reveal the medieval obsession with symbolism. Instead of beating or imprisoning, the community wanted to show the crime through costume. Justice became visible, acted out in grotesque masks and ridiculous outfits. It was morality staged as carnival, a performance that blurred lines between law, theater, and folklore. A quirky tidbit, some shame masks were decorated with devils or demons, the idea being that the woman was marked not only as a sinner but as something monstrous. You can picture villagers crossing themselves as they passed, half laughing, half anxious, as if the mask itself carried dark power. As the hours pass, the mask grows heavier. Your neck stiffens, your eyes sting, and the bells jingle with every movement. The laughter that once rang loud begins to fade, replaced by whispers, then silence, as the crowd disperses. You are left alone in the square, a jester without an audience, still bound to the role of your crime. Finally, when the mask is lifted, the air feels sharp and fresh, the weight gone, but the memory clings. You rub your face where the metal pressed, your skin marked by grooves. And though the costume is gone, you know the image will linger in your neighbors' minds for years. So the shame masks, absurd and cruel, were more than punishment. They were mirror showing not only the supposed fault of the woman who wore them, but also the delight and judgment of the society that watched. The heavy mask is gone at last, but another kind of punishment looms in that is not theatrical, not noisy, but quietly devastating. This is banishment to the edges, the sentence of exile. Imagine being told to leave your home, your hearth, your family, and to live instead on the outer fringes of the village, sometimes for months, sometimes forever. You stand at the edge of the settlement, a bundle of belongings clutched in your arms. Behind you lies the cluster of timber houses, the ringing church bell, the chatter of neighbors. Ahead, only fields, woods, and the uncertainty of survival. To be banished was not simply to move house, it was to lose the heart of community life. Exile fell upon women for many reasons: infidelity, accusations of witchcraft, disobedience, or simply being too troublesome for neighbors' patience. Historians still argue whether this punishment was codified law or more an informal verdict enforced by gossip and threats. In many cases, it mattered little if the result was the same: you were gone. At first, you imagine it might not be so terrible. A cottage on the edge of the forest, quiet evenings, no jeering crowds. Yet loneliness soon weighs heavier than any stone. You miss the sound of bells calling to mass, the chatter of gossip in the square, even the annoyance of quarrelsome neighbors. Human beings were not meant to live alone, especially in an age when survival depended on many hands working together. Exile often meant poverty. Without access to markets, you lived on scraps, roots pulled from the earth, fish caught in muddy streams, berries gleaned from hedgerows. Sometimes sympathetic villagers left food at the edge of the fields, a silent offering of pity, though they rarely dared to speak to you directly. You became a shadow, half in and half out of society. The edges carried their own dangers. Wolves in the forest, thieves on the road, the bitter cold of winter nights. Imagine crouching in a ramshackle hut, the wind howling through cracks, your stomach itching with hunger, and knowing that safety was only a mile away but forbidden. Oddly, exile carried a strange mix of shame and superstition. Those banished were often whispered about, feared as if they carried a curse. Children dared each other to creep near the exile's hut, peeking in with wide eyes, then running shrieking back to the village. You had become both invisible and infamous, erased and remembered all at once. There were quirks to this punishment too. In some places, women exiled were forced to wear special clothing, plain gray gowns, or patched rags that marked them even if they tried to sneak back into the village. In one French tale, a woman was sent to live by the riverbank and made to ring a bell if she dared approach town, warning others of her presence. It sounds almost absurd, like a medieval leper's bell, only here it was gossip, not disease, that earned the clanging. And yet, as with so many punishments, defiance sometimes flickered through. You can imagine a woman cast out who, instead of shrinking, built her hut sturdier, tilled a hidden patch of land, and carved out a kind of independence. Perhaps she even grew freer than before, away from the endless judgment of neighbors. There is irony in that, a punishment of exile turning into a strange kind of freedom. Still, the itch of loneliness was the sharpest punishment. Sitting by a small fire, the smoke stinging your eyes, you hear the distant sound of bells or ladder from the village. You know that inside, they eat, drink, sing, and pray together while you are absent. That absence is the true sentence. By the time your exile ends, if it ends, you may find that you no longer belong. The community remembers, even if you wish to forget. The edge you were sent to has followed you back, invisibly, like a shadow. So banishment, quieter than stocks or masks, was no less cruel. It turned the edges of the map into prisons, teaching women that without community, survival itself frayed. And it leaves you wondering whether the loneliest punishment of all was not chains, but silence. The lonely hut at the village edge fades, and your punishment shifts once more, this time into the very core of survival: food. Imagine being told you may eat nothing but bread and water for weeks, sometimes months. This is the bread and water penance, a punishment that seems almost gentle compared to iron masks or ducking stools, yet carried its own quiet cruelty. You picture yourself at a wooden table, a single-course loaf before you. It is not the soft bread of feast days, baked with honey and butter, but a rough, dark loaf of rye, heavy and sour. Beside it sits a wooden cup of water, cold and plain. No salt pork, no pottage, no cheese, just this meager fare. Day after day, the same taste, the same meanness of nourishment. At first, you might laugh softly. Bread and water. That sounds more like a diet than a punishment. But the humor fades after a few days. The bread grows dry in your mouth, your belly churns with hunger, and your body grows weaker. In an age when daily labor demanded strength, hauling water, washing clothes, grinding grain, such deprivation was exhausting. He survived, but just barely. The punishment was often tied to the church. Women guilty of offenses like quarreling, missing mass, or minor theft might be ordered to eat only bread and water during Lent, or for 40 days, echoing biblical symbolism. Historians still argue whether the practice was strictly enforced or more symbolic, a reminder of penance rather than a strict diet. But records show that some endured it fully, and the toll was real. There is a strange irony in the bread and water penance. Bread, after all, was sacred. The daily bread was prayed for, celebrated, blessed. To reduce a woman's diet to bread alone was not only to starve her body but to twist the symbol of sustenance into a punishment. What was holy became humiliating. Imagine the monotony of it. Morning, bread and water. Evening, bread and water. No herbs, no broth, no warmth. Your stomach protests, your spirit sags. The sound of neighbors enjoying stew or roasting meat becomes almost unbearable. A whiff of garlic or onion in the air is enough to make your mouth water painfully. And yet, there were small rebellions. Some women found ways to flavor their punishment, soaking the bread in herbs or dipping it into broth offered secretly by a sympathetic child. A quirky tale survives of a woman in Flanders who was punished with bread and water but convinced her daughter to smuggle butter in a hollowed-out crust. When discovered, Both were scolded, but the story became a local joke. The penance also carried public weight. Everyone knew you were under bread and water sentence, and neighbors whispered about it as though your meals were a moral theater. The simplicity of your plate became another mask of shame, displayed not on your face but on your table. There was, however, a gentler side. Some priests viewed the punishment as genuinely cleansing, a way to return a woman's soul to humility. You can almost hear the quiet sarcasm in your bedtime voice. Imagine humility being measured by how loudly your stomach growls. By the end of such a sentence, your body was lighter, weaker, your hands trembling as you returned to daily work. But your endurance carried its own defiance. You survived on crusts and water alone, and in some ways, that resilience was the truest victory. So the bread and water punishment, bland as it sounds, was a medieval lesson in deprivation. It taught that even the simplest gifts could be turned against you, that hunger could be wielded not only by nature but by neighbors. And it lingers in memory as one of the quietest yet most lingering forms of shame. The meager crust of bread crumbles in your memory, but now the punishment grows louder, rowdier, and far less lonely. This is the Charivari mocking parodia cacophony of pots and pans, laughter and shouting, all directed at you. If exile was silence, this was noise weaponized. You hear it first before you see it, the clanking of kettles, the banging of spoons, the shrill whistles of children. The villagers gather outside your home, their voices rising in a chorus of jeers. They chant ditties made up on the spot, some crude, some comical, all designed to sting. The parade begins not with lawmen or priests, but with neighbors themselves, taking justice into their own noisy hands. The Charivari was usually aimed at women accused of marital disobedience, wives who scolded their husbands, defied household authority, or were rumored to stray. Sometimes it punished men, too, especially those seen as weak or cuckolded. But for women, it was especially biting. Instead of stocks or masks, you were forced to face a living carnival of mockery. Historians still argue whether Charivaris were more spontaneous pranks or organized traditions. Some describe them as chaotic eruptions of village mischief, others as ritualized punishments woven deeply into community order. Perhaps they were both equal parts jest and judgment. Imagine being dragged from your house and seated backward on a donkey, a common Charivari spectacle. Your skirts ride up awkwardly as the animal plods forward, the crowd hooting with laughter. Someone bangs a drum, another shakes a rattle, and the noise swells into absurdity. You are paraded through the streets, mocked not with silence but with overwhelming sound. A quirky detail, in some regions, neighbors carried pots and pans tied to sticks, rattling them like clumsy cymbals. In France, this was called the riding of the skillet. In England, it was known as rough music. No matter the name, the message was the same, the community disapproved, and they made sure you and everyone else knew it. Sometimes, effigies were used in place of the person. If a woman had fled or hidden, a straw dummy dressed in her clothes was paraded instead, beaten with sticks as the crowd roared. This curious substitution shows that the punishment was less about the individual and more about the performance, a ritual of order disguised as comedy. And yet, there were moments of sly defiance. Imagine a woman forced into a Charivari who begins to laugh along with the crowd, clapping to the rhythm, mocking herself more extravagantly than her neighbors ever could. In that instant, she robs the punishment of its sting, turning the jeers into a twisted kind of applause. The Charivari was loud, but it was also fleeting. By nightfall, the crowd dispersed, the pans went back to the hearth, and the donkey returned to its stable. Yet the echoes lingered. For days afterward, villagers repeated the rhymes, chuckled at the memory, and reminded you of the donkey ride. The noise of the punishment lived on in whispers long after the clanging ceased. There is also a curious overlap with festivity. Charivaris often coincided with weddings, carnivals, or feast days, blurring the line between celebration and punishment. One might leave the parade not knowing whether it had been a jesting festival or a cruel ordeal, or perhaps it was both. You imagine yourself at the end of it, stepping down from the donkey, your ears still ringing. The crowd melts away, leaving silence so sharp it almost hurts. You return to your cottage, aching. Not from blows but from laughter hurled like stones. And you realize that sometimes, the cruelest punishments were not iron or rope, but ridicule echoed loudly enough to fill the night. The echoes of clanging pots fade, but punishment still takes stranger turns. This time, you are not dumped, exiled, or masked. You are simply forced to carry an absurd symbol through the streets. Imagine being handed a wooden stool, or worse, a struggling cat, and ordered to parade it as though it were a crown jewel. You clutch the stool awkwardly, its legs poking out at odd angles, knocking against your chin as you stumble along the cobblestones. The crowd bursts into laughter. A woman who scolded too much, or nagged her husband, or disrupted the village peace, now made ridiculous by carrying a household object in her arms like a holy relic. The meaning is clear enough: she was burdensome at home, and now the burden itself is on display. In some towns, the stool was symbolic of the marriage. A quarrelsome wife might be forced to carry it through the marketplace, a shameful reminder that her place was in domestic obedience. You can almost roll your eyes at the absurdity, a whole village jeering at a woman lugging a chair, as though furniture itself could pass judgment. Then there was the cat. Records from Switzerland and Germany describe women carrying cats tied in sacks, or clutched squirming in their arms. The animal yowled, scratched, and wriggled, its protest adding comedy to the punishment. A gossip's sharp tongue was compared to a cat's claws, her cackling voice to a cat's yowl. To force her to parade with the animal was both mockery and metaphor. Historians still argue whether this was truly common or more folklore retold in moral tales, but the images persisted, half funny, half cruel. You picture yourself with a writhing tabby clutched tight, its claws snagging your gown, its tail lashing in outrage. The villagers roar with laughter, pointing and imitating. The cats shriek. For you though, it is no comedy. The scratches sting, the weight tires your arms, and the humiliation cuts deepest of all. Quirky local twists abounded. In one German town, women were made to carry stools upside down, balancing pots or jugs on the legs as they walked. In another, a woman accused of quarreling had to cradle a rooster under her arm, the bird flapping indignantly all the way to the church steps. The punishments blurred into folk theater, each object chosen to turn daily life into spectacle. And yet, beneath the farce, there was meaning. The community turned your own household stools, cats, roosters into instruments of shame. What once represented domestic order became symbols of disobedience. It was as though the home itself had turned against you, declaring you unworthy. Imagine finishing the parade, your arms itching from the weight of the stool, or scratched raw from the claws of the cat. You set it down at last, the crowd dispersing into chuckles and whispers. Tomorrow, when you pass through the square, neighbors will not see you alone. They will picture you again with your ridiculous burden, forever remembered as the woman of the stool or the cat. It is strangely fitting, in a sarcastic way. Medieval punishments had a genius for absurdity. The ducking stool turned into entertainment, the scold's bridle into street theater, and here, a simple piece of furniture or an unlucky animal into a tool of disgrace. You almost want to laugh, even as you wince. So the punishment of carrying cats or stools reminds you that shame could be conjured from the most ordinary things. A chair, a pet, a rooster each became part of the strange stage play of justice, where women's dignity was chipped away not with chains or fire, but with ridicule disguised as ritual. The memory of the cat's claws fades, but superstition lingers in the air like smoke. For the next punishment is not built of wood or iron, nor carried on carts or in baskets. It is woven out of fear itself, relics and superstitions that shaped punishments unique to women. You picture yourself kneeling before the altar, not in prayer but in judgment. A relic, perhaps a saint's bone or a vial of holy waters pressed against your forehead as a priest declares that you must swear your innocence upon it. If you falter, if you tremble, if you so much as hesitate, the community assumes guilt. Punishment, then, comes not through proof but through suspicion, through the way superstition weighs heavier than evidence. Historians still argue whether these ordeals were meant as genuine tests or simply theater to frighten women into compliance. Either way, they often ended the same, with humiliation, penance, and gossip that lingered longer than any iron mask could. Relics could be part of ordeal. Women accused of lying might be forced to carry sacred objects barefoot around the church 3 times, their shame magnified by the holy weight in their hands. In some places, charms or amulets thought to ward off evil were instead tied around the neck of the accused, turning protective talismans into mocking chains. Imagine the sting of wearing a necklace of garlic bulbs through the streets, villagers laughing at the witch who supposedly spoke too much. One curious story tells of a woman in Saxony accused of sorcery who was made to carry a relic of St. Lawrence while standing barefoot on hot stones. The relic was said to protect her if she were innocent. She burned her feet, of course, but the crowd declared it proof of guilt. You almost sigh at the absurdity, faith twisted into fire, compassion into cruelty. Sometimes superstition bled into costume. A woman branded a witch might be forced to wear a crown of herbsage, mugwort, or nettles meant to reveal her guilt. Children followed, plucking leaves and tossing them into the air, a cruel parody of festivity. At other times, relics of saints were displayed against the woman's body as if holiness itself could thwart her. And yet, just as often, the line blurred between punishment and protection. A woman might be forced to carry a relic as penance, but in the privacy of her heart she might take comfort in it. Imagine clutching a cross meant to disgrace you, yet whispering a prayer into its wood, believing that it gave you strength rather than shame. Punishment became paradox. Porky tidbits survive in folktales. In one, a gossiping woman was ordered to wear a rosary of fish bones around her neck, each bone representing a tale she had told. In another, a scolding wife was forced to wear a charm of tin bells said to drive away demons, but in reality, it only announced her presence to the whole village. And through it all, superstition clung like heavy. Villagers believed relics could reveal lies, charms could force confession, and punishments could be sanctified by the presence of holy things. Women, especially, bore the brunt of this mingling of faith and fear. Their bodies became stages for relics to work upon, their shame framed as spiritual lesson. As the bells of Vespers toll in your imagination, you picture the punishment ending, the relic removed, the charms discarded, the nettle crown slipping to the ground. Yet the sting of superstition lingers. For in the medieval world, punishment was never just about law, it was about belief. And belief, more than iron or stone, could bind you long after the ropes fell away. The nettle crown slips away, and with it the long shadow of relics and charms. Now the punishments themselves begin to fade, retreating into history. You stand once more in the village square, but this time the stocks are empty, the ducking stool rots by the riverbank, and the shame masks gather dust in a clerk's chest. This is the slow retreat of cruelty, the fading of bizarre punishments as Europe stepped cautiously into new ages of law, order, and softer notions of justice. By the late Middle Ages, and into the Renaissance, voices began to question whether humiliation and spectacle truly served God or community. Priests spoke of mercy, philosophers wrote of reason. Historians still argue whether these changes came from genuine compassion or simply the shifting needs of society. Perhaps it was both. Imagine a village courtroom in the 16th century. Where once a woman would have been dragged to the ducking stool, she is now fined a few coins. Instead of shaved heads, penances are given, prayers, fasts, or small alms to the poor. It is not freedom, not equality, but it is softer, less cruel. The punishments lingered longest in memory. Even as the actual stocks vanished from town squares, neighbors still joked about them, recalling the days when gossips were dumped or shamed. Old devices became curiosities, sometimes preserved in town halls as relics of the past. You can almost picture a child in the 1700s poking at a rusty brank in a dusty corner, shivering with both fear and fascination. And yet, the spirit of such punishments lived on in subtler ways. Public shame never truly disappeared, it simply shifted. Instead of masks and carts, there were whispers and slanders. Instead of exile to the edges, there was quiet exclusion from guilds or markets. Medieval cruelty softened, but it never truly died, it reshaped itself for new times. There are quirky notes here too. In some places, ducking stools were still used well into the 18th century, though more as curiosities than serious justice. Travelers wrote of laughing at them as quaint relics. What had once been terror became tourist attraction. You almost smile at the irony, yesterday's nightmare, today's curiosity. But there is also a lesson. These punishments, bizarre as they seem, remind you how fragile dignity was, especially for women. A word spoken too sharply, a quarrel too loud, a glance mistaken for defiance, and the entire community could turn into judge and jury. You realize how much strength it must have taken to endure, and how many women carried their shame with silent resilience. Now in your imagination, the square grows quiet. The stocks are dismantled, the ducking stool left to rot, the brank rusting in the corner. The crowd disperses, not in laughter or jeers, but in silence. You breathe easier. The cruel theater is ending, replaced slowly, imperfectly by laws written in books rather than mocked out in masks and ropes. And as the last traces of these punishments fade, you are left with a strange sense of both sorrow and relief. Sorrow for those who endured, relief that such spectacles no longer stand in the square. History may be the square falls quiet now, and the memory of laughter and jeers drifts away like smoke on an evening breeze. The iron, the wood, the stones, the masks, they all fade into shadow. What remains is only the hush of twilight, and the thought of women who endured, who carried their burdens with more grace than the punishments ever intended. You picture a hearth glowing in the distance, its warmth spilling gently through the cracks of shutters. Snow begins to fall outside, soft and steady, covering the cobblestones where parades once passed and crowds once gathered. The world that seemed so harsh in daylight now feels tender under the hush of night. The square, once stage for ridicule, is now blanketed in silence, the air cool and still. Inside your imagination, you settle near the fire. The flames dance in slow patterns, golden against the dim room. Shadows rise and fall across the walls like gentle tides. A pot simmers faintly, carrying the smell of herbs and warmth. No one mocks, no one jeers. The only sound is the soft crackle of the logs and the occasional sigh of the wind outside. Your breath slows as you imagine resting your head against a pillow, the weight of history easing away. The cruel devices are gone, tucked away like old relics in the attic of time. What remains instead are stories curious, strange, sometimes absurd that now belong to the past. They cannot touch you here. So, let the firelight flicker. Let the hush of snow soften the world beyond the window. Let your thoughts drift, lighter than feathers, slower than candle smoke. For tonight, you are safe, and the echoes of old punishments are nothing more than fading whispers in a distant square. Good night, dear listener. Sleep well.